Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. We are welcoming today someone we've been trying to get on the podcast for a while. The mysterious guest who's finally we've buffaloed into coming on. State Representative, Pennsylvania State Representative Rick Krajewski from the 188th District of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Welcome to the program, Rick.
Thank you. I didn't know I was so long awaited.
Well, you know, Ryan and I have been voting for you over the years, so it's personal for us. It's not just about the.
Thank you. Thank you. Like how many times it take to vote for this guy for him to get on our podcast?
That's right.
When will
what
he
else
get
we have to do? Come on.
Why isn't he in the ballot box with us? Why doesn't he know?
Yeah. Well, I the joke, of course, is we tried to get you on. I think it was in 2020 when you were first running, and it sort of fell through, and we never tried again. But you know, here you are, and you know, if I think I'm curious to get your perspective after a number of years, because I mean, it's been a while. I mean, 2020 was a shockingly long time ago. It feels like yesterday, but it was not.
Time has also been warped since the pandemic started. So who knows how long it's been for all of us?
No. Has it been 6 years? Has it been 16? You know, it's hard to tell. It certainly has felt a while. I mean, you know, there was a sort of milestone moment that I had that I still haven't, you know, quite sussed out, you know, how I feel about it. When I realized, you know, before I ran for office, I was an organizer full time. And I had the moment where I passed having spent more time as a legislator than an organizer. And that was an interesting time point where I'm like, oh, this has really been, I guess I'm like a career politician. I guess that's what they call that. You know, you've been doing it for a couple of years now. But yeah, it's been a wild trip for sure. But I feel very proud of what I've been able to do. You know, myself, obviously, I know you've had Nikhil on the show too. It's been awesome to go through this with him, you know, especially having, you know, been friends and organizers before being in office, to be able to look at, you know, the work that we've collectively been able to do over the last 5-6 years is pretty awesome. So I'm feeling pretty good.
And I imagine you can take the organizer out of the organizing, but you can't take the organizing out of the organizer. Am I right?
That's right. And that's also, you know, what I tell myself. I'm like, oh, no. You've been organizing the full time, right? Organizing, which is also true. You know, it's I've actually, I think that's also why I and our collective have been able to be so effective. Is because we were organizers. We were trained organizers. You know, myself and Nikhil, we came up to Reclaim Philadelphia. We came up in a specific organizing style that really instilled in us the importance of thinking about relationships and power and strategy around campaigns. And I constantly use that praxis when I'm in the halls of power, because anywhere you go, whether you're at a community meeting, whether you're in Harrisburg, whether you're in city council, all this work is comprised of power and relationships and motivations. And so the blueprint works everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and we should clarify for listeners that Nikhil is Nikhil Saval, who is a state senator, and his district is in like central Philly, not downtown, central city, thereabouts. And your district, the 188th district, is in West Philly, where I used to live and where Alexei now lives. And yes, I'm very sorry that I abandoned.
Just don't tell me you moved to Nikhil's district. If you did, I'm quitting, getting off the podcast immediately.
He was fed up. He said, "You know what? I'm going to support the politician who's come on the podcast more."
Okay, I see. He was like, but there's too many elections where I voted for this guy and he hasn't come on my show.
Yeah, he gave me a shot of a whiskey and a big turkey for Thanksgiving, and you know, it was I am now in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, the cultural mecca of the universe. You know, if
you're out there,
if any listeners need some like rusted ass railroad tracks, big piles of rotting garbage, closed up factories, big piles of bricks that have fallen down, we got you covered, baby. Come up here. come see what we got. We'll throw you in the Susquehanna River. You'll never be seen again. But at any rate, so,
that won't happen in West Philly.
No,
we'll treat you much better in West Philly.
Yeah, you'll go in the Schuylkill, and your death will be more.
Can you tell that Ryan misses West Philly? Ryan wishes he was here.
I can tell.
There's many different types of garbage in the Schuylkill River, whereas here it's all mine tailings. It's just very boring. But anyways, I'm getting off topic here. So like you and Nikhil, like you guys are part of a crop of sort of insurgents who came out. I moved to West Philly in 2019, and I remember the fellow who was there before, who held your seat, James Roebuck. And I actually just was looking him up while I was doing some prep for the podcast, and he recently passed away in 2024. Rest in peace. But I remember getting many calls from him when I was living there. So I guess that would be my first question. Like, what you're in a big chamber, 203 members, if I remember correctly. What have you sort of learned about being in the halls of power, trying to wield influence in some way and serve, your constituents there in Philadelphia?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, again, this goes back to having been trained as an organizer and being able to use analysis to determine, how power moves in the state legislature, frankly, has been essential to being effective. Because as you mentioned, we have 203 state reps. I believe we are the largest state legislature. If not, we're definitely like top 5.
I think New Hampshire has you beat. They got like 1,500 of them. It's like every other person in the state.
Got it. But I think they're also part-time, right? So I think we're probably one of the largest full-time ones for sure. But I say that to say, if you are not clear about, who actually has the influence and power to, satisfy a demand that you have or a policy, you could spend your entire career talking to the wrong people. Like with 203 people, there's endless people to talk to and build relationships with. And it's not to say that all 203 people don't, deserve to build relationships. I think it's important to understand Pennsylvania and to understand people's motivations to, build relationships with a wide, breadth of the legislators. But when it comes to, having a piece of legislation and understanding who do I have to talk to and who do I have to get bought into this policy idea for it to become law, that requires having a pretty sharp understanding of, the structures of committees, who's the chair of what committees, what is the structure of our leadership of our Democratic caucus and Republican caucuses, what rank and file members, right, have influence within either chamber and either caucus. And because I was able to have that analysis and that ability to, understand, okay, this is the chair of the housing committee, so I got to make sure I'm good with him and his staff if I'm going to move this bill. I have this decarceral legislation, around juvenile justice. I got to make sure I meet with the Republican chair of the Children and Youth Committee because I need it to be bipartisan. If I didn't have the ability to make those calculations and to determine, who are the targets and who are the people that have to be bought in to the campaign, it would be like, being in the middle of the ocean and not knowing where to swim. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned in the last, 5.5 years is being able to have a sharp understanding of how power flows in Harrisburg.
I'm curious, Rick, how quickly do those dynamics change? Like, do you have a steep learning curve and then you kind of have the lay of the land, or do you have to stay on your toes and some of the assumptions you make or some of the things you think about power have shifted before you realize it and you have to kind of rethink things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's constantly iterative, right? Because one, right, you have members move in, they have members move out, you have members rise to leadership and decline. You have changes in leadership in both caucuses and both chambers, and so you're kind of constantly evaluating. Okay, who matters in the Republican Senate, right? And who are the people they look to when it comes to economic policies or housing policies, and that generally is static, but you also have to be able to adjust according to changes in the chambers, even just changes politically, right? The changes that may exist just around the political conversation with various policy issues. And I think just constantly being able to take that data and input and use that to evaluate, okay, what is the current landscape? I think is a skill that I've had to just consistently deploy. I think the thing that also I think was maybe the learning curve, or just maybe like a realization or reflection, is it's interesting, right? As someone who is very explicit about my politics, around being decarceral, around being a socialist. You can go on my websites and you can see what I'm about pretty quickly. And yet I've been able to, be pretty effective in Harrisburg. And I think even for myself, and I think even for a lot of external observers, there is maybe this assumption that Rick's going to be too radical for Harrisburg. It's a conservative legislature. They're not going to be able to, he's not going to be able to work with people, et cetera. And what I've come to understand, right, is when I meet with people, when I meet with legislators, I don't necessarily shy away from my values or my politics. I don't deny what I care about and what I believe in. But what I do, which again is I think the skill of a good organizer, is I think about how to communicate my values and my position in a way that actually makes sense with the other person's experience. So I think a perfect example I can share during my first term, and this was when we were still in the minority. I was actually approached about a policy idea from an organization in West Philly called Yeah Philly. They're a nonprofit that work with at-risk young people to basically, empower them, get them out of the cycles of violence, et cetera. They approached me with this problem where they have a lot of young people who were having difficulties accessing their birth certificates. And the reason was because at the time, if you were under 18, you needed parental consent to be able to get a copy of your birth certificate. And this was actually a problem for a lot of their clients because you had a lot of young people who were in the foster care system, who may have been housing insecure, who may have been caught up in the justice system. And so as a result, getting their parents was actually pretty difficult, getting them to be able to contact them and for them to consent to get the copy of the vital document. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to work on a bill to actually lower the age to where you would be eligible to, whether it's, I think we started like 14 or 16, something like that, to be able to get a document, your birth certificate, without getting parental consent, which matters, right? If you think about being a young person, if you're trying to get a work permit, if you're trying to get your driver's license, if you're trying to access social benefits, you need documentation. And, one of the main things they ask for is your birth certificate. So if you don't have that document, you're suddenly locked out from all of these social benefits that can allow you to actually move away from the possibility of violence and crime. So this was a way of trying to break them out of that cycle. And so we worked on this bill, HB 1475, and I remember, right, so I had the bill. The bill was introduced. It was introduced in the health committee at the time. And so the first thing I did is I met with the Democratic chair, Dan Frankel, who I've developed a really close working relationship with now, and his executive director as well. That's the other thing I'll say to anyone listening here. Big pro tip, talk to staff, right? Legislators are important. Talk to the legislator, but talk to the staff, right? Because they're the ones that are doing the work when the cameras go away, right? When people aren't paying attention, it's the staff. And shout out to staff, right? They're the workers that are really making these legislatures run. But I met with both of them and I said, tell me what I have to do to get this bill passed. And they said, well, you have to get Republican support because, the Republican chair is the person who sets the agenda. And that's the other thing about Pennsylvania. It's super partisan. There's a saying that they use that is the minority has their say, the majority has their way. Because if you're in the majority, you basically control the calendar, you control what bills get passed, et cetera. So at the time, I had to get the Republican chair of the committee bought into the legislation. And the chair at the time was this woman named Kathy Rapp, a hard conservative from rural Western Pennsylvania. She's the chair of the pro-life caucus. So really a heavy hitter in the Republican caucus. And I needed to get her to be able to support this bill. And so I had to understand, what are her motivations? What does she care about? So I set up a one-on-one conversation with her where I got to understand her district. I got to understand what she cared about. And I started to realize that she cared a lot about kids, right? I mean, that was part of the genesis around her belief in being pro-life is she cares about kids, she cares about young people. And so when I talked with her, I was like, well, this is about helping young people lift themselves out of poverty, and about young people entering the workforce, right? Like having to frame it in their language is about, young self-empowerment, them being able to not have to rely on the government, right? Getting themselves out of poverty, et cetera. And when I communicated the bill in that way, she was bought in. And I met with a couple other Republican members on the committee as well. And the same thing, I was like, this is about, do you remember when you had your first job when you were 14, right? How good it felt to have your first paycheck, to be able to buy something with your own money, right? That you worked hard for. That's what we're trying to do with these kids. We want to get them the opportunity to enter the workforce. And they were like, that sounds great. Like we want more, we love more young people in the workforce. Let's do it. So I actually got multiple members of the Republican committee to co-sponsor the bill. And they brought it up for a vote and passed it out of committee, which is very rare. They don't run Democratic bills. But because I was able to meet with them, because I was willing to lean into some discomfort and still have the conversation and also have curiosity about their perspective, I was able to get them bought in this idea without necessarily compromising my values. So that was a really educational, really experience for me.
That's fantastic. Do you think that even if PA is pretty partisan as far as Commonwealths or states go, there's still that kind of possibility, as hard as it might be to do, is still more possible than at like the federal level in Congress, where maybe there's more money and there's maybe, I mean, at the state level, you have principled and maybe crazy people, but they still maybe care about their constituents and have that like sincere beliefs more. I don't know. It's just an impression I get. I don't know if that's your experience.
I think so. I do think some of that rhetoric still infects the local state level too, right? Like, people still take direction from like national trends. But I also think that state rep is like a small enough, like local kind of thing where you do still have people who like come in with real motivations. You may not agree with them, but they have motivations that aren't just about following the Republican or Democratic line. And I think what they appreciate also is if you just step back and just think about human behavior and psychology, right? Like someone saying, I want to meet with you and I want to hear what you care about. And I'm actually curious about what you care about. I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to think about how we can work together on something. That's like a flattering conversation no matter where you are on the political spectrum, right? And so I guess also it goes a long way to be relational and to not write people off just because of what party they're from, or to not just fall into immediate transactional, like, hey, you're a Republican, I need you to support my bill, when you actually do the work of just developing some relationships and having some curiosity, people appreciate that and they respond to it, right? Because they feel like you're investing in their actual, values. And that's like half the work, frankly.
And it's nice that they're not quite as narcissistic as Trump, so you don't have to make a fake New York Post newspaper in order to get them.
But still, again, that was Zerline being an excellent organizer, right? He understood the motivations of Trump, which are right, like self-gratification, right?
Spectacular, yeah.
It was expert like troll organizing, like I was very impressed, but yeah, most of them don't, most legislators I meet with don't necessarily need to just be like fawned over. They just need you to get where they're coming from, even if you disagree with it, and to be willing to make a case about why whatever you're working on is important to them.
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot with respect to like the sort of two-party duopoly versus the parliamentary systems that exist in other countries. Like I feel like when you have more than two parties, it becomes much easier to cut the sort of deals that you're describing, where it's like, okay, you're a liberal, like in the European sense, like a sort of center-right party, and I'm the Green Party, but like we can cut some deals on like streamlining permitting for windmills or some shit like that. And it's because doesn't get the same sort of just camp A, camp B, and you're just fighting hammer and tongs over everything. And if you agree with it, it's bad by definition on one side and the reverse on the other side, whereas like you just say, like it is possible, even like the DSA guy from Philadelphia, to cut a deal with the pro-life Western Pennsylvania, if you can just like, align the institutions just a little bit. But in that context, I wanted to ask you, because it's also the case that like the Democratic Party is a giant coalition that would in any other country be many different parties. And so you're like part of what would be a socialist or a social democratic party. I mean, on literally like a DSA member in Philadelphia, but you're also, you're part of the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania, which is not that at a state level.
Definitely not. No.
And so can you speak to like interacting with the state party and how that sort of, works in terms of trying to, setting the state agenda and budgets and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because in a way, I absolutely agree with you about like the shortcomings of the two-party system versus something parliamentary. But I think also, and so as a result, I should say, there's a way in which I kind of operate as like a caucus or a party within the party, right? As like the left, progressives, whatever you want to, however you want to claim the space, right? Like there's a collective of us who are saying, we see this apparatus that is the Democratic Party that, was the vehicle for working class politics in this country that has, lost a lot of that way, in my opinion. And, we're taking on the responsibility and taking on the mantle of making this party, more left, more aligned with the working class and putting out a vision that's actually going to be about investing in the public goods, right? Investing in people. And so, part of my work is influencing the party and influencing it by showing that the ideas and vision that I care about is actually viable and popular. And that's also where I do feel grateful being in Harrisburg, because it truly does feel like a microcosm for American politics, right? Like it's literally the battleground state. It's this massive chamber. There's a Democratic House, there's a Republican Senate. You have everyone from, like you said, myself, a DSA member to, members of pro-life caucus and people who proudly, claim the MAGA mantle. And you have to get stuff done in that environment. And so it's actually, it truly does feel like I'm kind of on the vanguard of like, can we actually show that, right? Like socialist politics and left politics are winnable and viable. And can we build coalition to get them done? And I feel like that's literally the work that I have to do every day that I'm in the Capitol. And so it's been exciting because we've been able to show, whether it's that bill that I mentioned earlier. In fact, a big win we actually just got last year that I'm super proud of is we passed the first ever bill to legalize adult use cannabis out of Pennsylvania. And maybe you guys already know this, but I was as a prime sponsor of that bill, and we actually proposed a pretty unique model and selling it through state stores, which was, I will say, a very, very controversial thing to do. But I was bought into the idea because, one, we have a unique opportunity in that we have a state liquor system that doesn't exist in those states. So we already had an existing footprint of the state, selling a product. And then secondly, right, like I've seen the complete failures of corporate cannabis and the ways that it just has turned into a monopoly that has, shut out Black and brown people, that has exported extreme amounts of wealth, and essentially is capitalism once again doing its work in a new industry. And so we had a unique opportunity to like do something different. And this is actually maybe a fun callback, right? Is I worked on that bill with Dan Frankel, the chair of that bill I mentioned earlier, right? Who was basically like, oh man, like Rick knows how to move interesting legislation. Like I want to work with him on this bill. And so we introduced this legislation, and then we did the work of moving our colleagues on it which was extremely difficult because, as you can imagine, the cannabis industry like truly hated the bill. There was actually an op-ed by another member where they called it communist cannabis, which I thought was actually pretty catchy.
Communist.
One token, you're a radical.
Right. It was the Marxist marijuana. So it was a whole big fight. But we did organizing. I had organizing conversations, and what I did is, again, I didn't say, hey, I'm a socialist, I believe in the state owning the means of production. I said, hey, this is a bill that, one, will double the amount of public revenue we can get from legalizing adult use cannabis, which matters for funding public schools, funding public transportation, funding all the other things that we know we're going to have cuts around because of the actions of Congress. We can double the amount of money we get from this. Secondly, these are going to be union jobs because our state stores are already unionized. So we're going to expand our union footprint. Thirdly, because we still even had Democratic members who frankly were kind of worried about legalizing cannabis, we were like, well, what better way to have protections in this than to have the state determine where these stores are going to end up? So that you don't have a dispensary next to a school or a daycare center or whatever, because we would never do that with the state stores. And when we did the conversation that way, it completely took it away from any kind of like communist cannabis, like rhetoric, dog whistle stuff. And people were able to engage with it on the merits of the legislation and were bought in. And so we actually passed that bill with full Democratic support. And so now, as a result, and look, do I think this Republican Senate is going to pass a state store bill? Probably not. But what we have done is we've now moved the conversation to make sure that any bill that legalizes cannabis is going to be more progressive, because we've actually gotten Democratic members bought into a anti-corporate version of creating this industry. And so that influences the Democratic Party, that influences Democratic politics, when we can take our policies and show that they can be bought in from the left and the right.
Yeah. So say more about that. It's stuck because of the Republicans in the Senate, but the idea is that if the Senate is no longer Republican, then that will, like, a different bill, or that this one will move, or what's your thinking there about what success will eventually look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, frankly, it's going to be hard to pass any cannabis
even
bill.
If it's Democratic, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should say just with Republicans, like any bill. Okay. Any bill with a divided chamber is going to be hard, right? Because Republicans are still conservative on this issue. If we are to get a Democratic majority in the Senate, that does make it more viable to move a state store model bill. Frankly, because there are Democratic senators who are also pretty bought into the idea. Like I said, we have a strong union presence in our state stores already. So there are a lot of legislators who see the value of that and have seen how, one, the state store system has brought lots of money to the Commonwealth, but also has provided stable union jobs for people in a way that the private industry would not. And so because of that, and because, again, we showed that there's Democratic support in the House, it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible with the Democratic Senate.
What do the midterms look like in terms of the possibilities for the Senate? Is it feasible to flip it?
I think everyone feels that's definitely possible. We'd have to pick up 2 seats, and there are 2 suburban Republicans who are up this cycle, who did not deliver public transportation funding for their districts, and so we'll see. I guess we'll see how much that impacts them.
And maybe this is a shift to a broader discussion about the Democratic Party in PA, but are the Democrats in PA, with the midterms coming up, learning from the affordability messaging of Mamdani? Is that something they're taking on board?
I think so, right? I do think people understand that Zoran's politics are ascendant, and I can say, right, like when he won, no matter where Democrats were on the spectrum, they were like, that guy, that was awesome. Everyone, people like a winner, right? Like people like winning, and so again, when you show your ideas win, everyone's like, oh man, like Zoran's great, and so I do think people recognize that he tapped into real economic grievances that that working people have, right? And that if we want to be successful at politics, we have to replicate the agenda that he put forward. I have seen, members embrace that in the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. I think we can be embracing it more. I do think the landscape's a bit different, because of the partisan nature of Pennsylvania. But if anything, I think that actually emphasizes the importance of leading with working class issues, because the other thing that working in the state legislature has made me very clear about is that there is no path to transforming this country without recapturing the white working class, and the working class that are in Wilkes-Barre, right? Like are in parts of the state, right? Beyond you, Ryan. We know you're on our side. But the other people, right? The people across Pennsylvania who have been sold this lie by conservative politics, who have real class grievances, due to the decline of American economies, right? Like, and who I think need to be brought back to be able to win our policies on a grand scale.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was just about to bring up, your perception, like being West Philly, because that was one area where Trump like really improved his margins relative to 2020 was in big cities.
Yes.
Even though he lost like Philly, he lost New York by huge margins. He lost them by a lot less than he did in 2020, and that was a big chunk of his margin of victory. So a lot of people pinned that on, you saw it in the polling that there was a big shift in basically black and brown people. Again, not like in terms of like they flipped, but black and brown people, particularly men, particularly Hispanic men, and then a whole lot of like non-voting happening in urban centers, voting from Joe Biden in 2020 to either voting for Trump or not voting in 2024. And so, yeah, I guess what's your sort of take, for lack of a better word, in terms of, where that population of people, and I suppose also, the white working class people who are now paying 50 cents a gallon more for gasoline, as I did today, than we did a week ago.
Insane.
Where do you think we're sitting there in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to start with the black and brown folks, which I think I think this is true for all demographics, white, black, brown, whatever working class identity, racial identity you have. But I think we've just seen an increased erosion of support, that is just a result of people, I think, really being fed up with the fact that, particularly on a national level, that like the Democratic Party has been unwilling to shed itself of its corporate class, right, and its corporate interests. I think people are sick of a party that says very socially progressive things without backing them up with a progressive economic agenda, right? And so, it does. People care about their material conditions, right? And you can say the right things about queer people, about trans people, about black and brown folks, but if you're not actually materially making people's lives better because you're not redistributing wealth in this country, people are going to be fed up and they're going to look for something else, and they're going to look for a different message. I think, black and brown people have had allegiance to the Democratic Party for generations, which is maybe why that erosion is happening a little bit later. But I think the reasons are the same as the white working class, which is that the Democratic Party has been so big tent that it wants to have everyone from, I guess, DSA members to people, right, who believe deeply in capitalism, right, and has actually not been willing to put forward a progressive economic agenda that is actually about calling out the fact that there's just extreme hoarding of wealth in America. People see that, and I think they're tired of being lied to, or at least not. If not lied to, at least they're tired of not being fed, not being given a message that they resonate with.
I think, don't you, that it also rings hollow to say that you care about people of color and women and queer people at the same time that you're if not supporting, at least not objecting to a genocide in Gaza, at the same time that maybe you're Chuck Schumer and others who kind of just greenlit the bombing of elementary school girls in Iran. If you're not anti-imperialist, if you're the kind of bourgeois feminist who doesn't care about bombing girls, or the kind of like liberal who is, all the memes, right? Hire more prison guards, right? Hire more female prison guards, like the clap, clap, clap.
Yes. Right. Yes.
Then that's going to ring hollow too, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people are sick of the identity politics that don't like, and I say this as someone, right, who believes in racial justice, who believes in Black liberation, but Black liberation also includes, right, moving away from capitalism, and you don't have that, and you just have the messaging. People see through that.
Are you having those tough conversations with other Democrats that are maybe? It's funny. I almost want to say, or not woke in like the real sense. You know what I mean? Like who don't get it, right?
Ye oldie woke.
No, I mean, people definitely come, right, because they know my politics. They're like, oh man, Zoran, what was the secret? Like as if I have Zoran on like speed dial. What was it? What was the secret sauce? And so people definitely have approached me about how and why these our policies are so effective. And I do think, again, people like winning. They like to see ideas that are ascendant. And to be frank, I think a lot of people know that these are the right things to do, but have not been shown, right, that they're politically viable. Have not been shown people with political courage to stand for these things, and to have the courage and frankly to have the organizing chops, right? Like to have the courage to stand up for what we know is right about. Right, like the realities of exploitation, and then to have the ability to organize people around the right vision.
That's actually promising, because it could be like you just said, that they don't have the hope, or they don't see how it's going to work, or how people might support it. That's a much better problem to deal with than someone who thinks the free market works well, right? Like who doesn't really understand the problems of capitalism. I was kind of worried that a lot of Democrats maybe still kind of believe, and maybe some do.
Those people do. To be clear, those people do.
I can imagine you sitting down. I can imagine you sitting down with somebody. So you think capitalism is good for people, right? Like that's what I'm hearing. Let me hear more about that. I'm curious about this point of view.
Say more. Yeah, no, I mean, it's obviously, right, like there's still, again, the Democratic Party's Big Tent. There are definitely people who still buy into free market economics, but there are also people who, again, because it is just the amount of wealth is just so disgustingly large, and you have people like Elon Musk who like has the net worth of like multiple countries that combined, right? Like you can believe in the market and still find that like abhorrent, And so there's still room to move people along to an idea of like that guy and all those other extremely rich people have too much money, and you should take that money and we should put it in the pockets of your constituents. Like there are people are bought into that idea, but they need someone to be able to take the first step and to say, I'm actually going to put a proposal forward to harness and to rein in this extreme wealth that is occurring.
And there is that kind of the billionaire tax movement. There is something like that going on in the state, right?
So I'm part of a coalition. It's called the Payback Coalition, that has a package of bills that are about progressive economic policies. I have introduced a bill to essentially increase the amount that we tax on passive income, aka like wealth tax essentially. And our bill, even sort of the more moderate version of the bill we have, we're still figuring out the exact numbers. Even on the low end, it would bring in like an additional $3 to $5 billion in tax revenue if we were just to tax this. Like, actually, one of the staffers we're working with called it money on money. was what he, if we taxed money on money, we would get $5 billion, which I think, again, if you say like, I think we should tax money that creates money. I think people are like, yeah, I agree with that,
Ryan, that reminds me of that great cartoon that the Brunigs did about capital interest. With my students sometimes. I don't know if we should share that with Rick in case he hasn't seen it. It's really helpful to explain how capital
Well, I think I wrote the script for that, but you could also reference the Louis C.K. bit about how when you're poor, the bank charges you for being poor. You can't only have $20. We're going to charge you because you only have $20. But if you're rich, the bank pays you for being rich.
Yes.
Yes,
it does.
You have so much money that we should give you some. Here, take this guy's 20. Fuck him.
Right. Take more money.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a no-brainer. I can't imagine that won't be a popular idea.
Massachusetts has been doing this, the millionaire tax, and and all the predictions about it leading to a mass exodus. It's like everyone's like, actually, I can afford this easily, and in fact, all it's going to do is reduce like the sort of positional, the price of the positional goods that the billionaires are sort of like competing against each other to buy. The slots in Martha's Vineyard and all that type of shit. They're just going to go down by whatever percentage the tax is, and everyone else is going to benefit.
Right.
But
it's so marginal, and to the point of the like relocation thing, it's like, do you understand how expensive that is, right? To like take your entire business and say, I'm going to actually move all this and completely start from scratch. It's too much of a sunk cost.
Yeah.
And to your point, they can afford it.
And I guess it's maybe a little bit easier in a blue state or something. So you like Boston, or especially like New York City. Like Zoran's talking about taxing the rich people, and like, oh, what are you going to do? You're going to go to Nashville? You're going to go to Tampa to live the New York City lifestyle? Go to the opera and like take public transportation everywhere from my Upper East Side apartment. The costs are too great. Like, come on.
Wait, Rick, did you mention if this were to happen, what the funds, the $5 billion, would be used for, or what the debates around that might be?
No, so that's why this has actually been an exciting time to do it, because it's the perfect answer to the Medicaid and Medicare cuts, right? There's this like austerity falsehood we've been told about. Well, we've gotten all these cuts from Congress, so we got to do some belt tightening. And also, like, I guess we're just going to kick off thousands of people off their healthcare because we just can't come up with the money, and that's a falsehood, right? That's the other thing that I think is kind of the thing. There's some ways in which I find it interesting that Trump has kind of like broken the like charade a little bit around like laws being like objective things that matter, like right, and like it's like laws are enforced by like violence in the state, right? But like
first it was just norms, it was breaching norms, and then it's like, forget norms, let's forget laws too.
Right. And so I mean, he's really just showing like what enforces laws is like power and threat and violence in the state, right? And I say all that to say it also extends to like like the ideas of like budgets and like spending, right? It's like there's nothing that actually says we can't spend more money, that we can't find more money. We just have decided the norms are, well, when you lose funding, you just have to, austerity is the solution. It's not, thinking about where to increase revenue streams, where to increase, taxation. It's austerity, because that's the dominant narrative in current American economic thinking, right? Is that it's neoliberalism. It's about keeping taxes low. It's about stimulating the market. It's not about increasing the tax on wealthy and corporations. But you can do that. We can easily bring in billions of dollars if we were willing to tax wealth, or if we were willing to repeal the uniformity clause in Pennsylvania, which is one of the most ridiculous things ever. It's a clause that says every tax has to be taxed at the same rate for anything under that class, which basically prevents you from doing any kind of progressive taxation. We could get rid of that and then bring in billions upon billions of dollars, but we don't have the will to, right? And so it's not we're kind of told, well, this is what we have to do because we don't have the money. It's like, no, we can get the money. We're just not willing to be bold about it.
Yeah,
that's why it's so great for leftists to be messaging, because they kind of break the they expand the imagination of the possible by just shattering these illusions and these myths.
Exactly.
It's like explaining to people that the NFL salary cap is bullshit, and teams can actually go past it if they just work the numbers differently. If they actually want to pay people, they can get around it. Same thing.
Exactly, right. And so I guess that's kind of what I mean is that in Trump sort of breaking the illusion too, right? Like we have to respond in kind, right? And show also like we also have to break out of this reality and show that another world is possible, and show that, you know, a world that isn't his like fascist nightmare is possible, which also requires breaking the rules, but breaking it in our way, right?
Yeah. It's a handy property of the United States that it's so big and rich. You know, Pennsylvania, I mean, what's the population? Like 20 million? The
Pennsylvania, I want to say it's like, I think it's
15.
yeah, something like that. I should know this.
Medium-ish. Oh boy, Rick could oh, this one's going on YouTube.
The attack ads write themselves. He doesn't even know the population of Pennsylvania.
But we're talking about like a medium-sized European country, and like pretty much every one of those, even the poor ones,
13 million. The answer is 13 million.
13 million. So national health insurance is not impossible in like Slovenia, which is probably a smaller population than that. But on that question, actually, something that occurs to me in specifically about Pennsylvania, how do we get rid of these tax farmers? Is that something that's on your agenda? The
tax farmers.
It's not a thing in Philly. I didn't realize it until you come out here into the hinterland. We're all being pillaged by the descendants of Antoine Lavoisier. No, but so the private tax collectors in Wilkes-Barre, I have to pay, last time I checked, 7 different taxes. There's a city property tax, a county property tax, a levy fee, income tax, and there's a per capita tax that's based on your occupation. That one's a real scam, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I'm forgetting a couple of them, but at any rate, some of those are collected by the city. I think the county property tax is collected by the county, Luzerne County, but there's 2 different private tax collectors that are tasked with collecting some of those fees. And I recently learned, because I got this thing in the mail that's like, oh yeah, here's another tax return that you need to fill out by hand and send it in. And I didn't do it because I thought it was a scam. Well, now I'm in arrears. And I have to file 3 years of local tax returns to Berkshire, I think is the name of this company. And that's not the only one. There's like 80 of them across this. And there used to be a lot more. I was just reading about this. It was simplified under Ed Rendell in 2008. Anyways.
So they're like debt collectors for like the state. They're like it's a private entity that collects tax on behalf of the county.
Yeah.
They like unnecessary middlemen and all that. Like
totally. I mean, it's like all of this information already exists in different government bureaucracies. The state has how much money you make from the federal government. The city, I'm sure, has that as well, because I'm telling them in the property tax thing. And yet somehow like the tax farmers from ancien regime France have burrowed into the system. And I was just reading about Washington State. The way they do it is the state is like, you just plug in, you're in your municipality and you set your tax rate, and then the state collects whatever you owe and just like transfers that payment. Because it's not the money, it's the fucking hassle of it. It's incredible. And the fact that I'm sure that a giant portion of the money is going to this goddamn company that's probably going to end with me in debtor's prison or something. But
yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. I think part of why maybe Philly doesn't have this problem is because our county and municipality are concentric.
Yeah, coterminous.
And that's not coterminous rather. And as our school district is as well. And we're the only city and county that has that. The rest of the state is actually, I think, similar to the scenario that you have, where you have a township, then there's a county, then there's a school district, but maybe that school district is between your county and another county. And in all of those different entities are trying to get their piece of the pie with their tax. And so you end up with like all these 3 or 4 different local governments that all frankly don't have enough resources. And so they end up, offloading their responsibilities to some private tax collector. I feel like that to me feels like a symptom of one, I think just a kind of like local government / like local control mentality that I think just sort of is part of American politics of like, oh no, we want to have control over our own little sliver of thing. We don't want the bigger guys telling us what to do. And so as a result, we're going to have this like, just Russian doll of different things that like all kind of control over the other, right? And then again, because we are so regressive with our tax structure in Pennsylvania, like a lot of these local municipalities, local school districts are just starved for money.
Yeah.
And so they end up coming up with all these like random little taxes to try to make up for the lack of revenue from the state.
Yeah. I guess maybe my question is, Rick, are you willing to be our Napoleon, to sweep the decks clean of all of the accumulated cruft of centuries and set ourselves up for rational governmental structure?
I mean, hey, that would be great. I would love to just erase the entirety of our debt and start anew. Like I said, it's not real anyway, right? So
yeah.
Now, since we only have a few more minutes left, Rick, I have a few questions that I was thinking of, and you can tell me if any of them interest you in particular. I'm curious about the legislation you've been working on banning algorithmic rent increases, and maybe explaining how that would help people to ban that. That was something I was curious about. And then more broadly, what 2026's focus is going to be, especially, I mean, given that the Republicans control the Senate, what's the plan there? And then maybe connected to that, I think a lot of people don't understand how constituent services, the role that plays, and how important that is. So those are some of the things I was thinking of.
Sure, yeah. Well, maybe I can start there. So yeah, I mean that's the thing, and I'll say that's the other thing that's like, frankly, the challenge, but also kind of amusing about, in a way, your title being state representative is like the most generic thing ever, because they're like, well, you represent me, right? So I can come to you to help defend me against my landlord. I'm like, no, I'm not a lawyer. I cannot give you any legal advice. Like, I can direct you to a community legal aid organization, but I cannot give you any legal advice at all. And so, we do provide constituent services in terms of like state services. So, things around taxes, unemployment, any kind of state services, anything with like, birth certificates, vital documents, things of that nature. We do those things. So we do operate as like a representative of state services. And I have like an office in West Philly. I have staff that are there, 9 to 5, that do intakes and handle casework for people. But because, again, of the sort of generic title, and also just the fact that like, people are just hungry for help, we do also do a lot of like traffic control. We're like, okay, like you're coming to us, but this is a city issue. So let's connect you to the city council person. Or, you're talking to us about SNAP, let's connect you with the congressman's office. So, the constituent services is as much helping people as it is directing people to where to get help. And that's a big part of the job that I appreciate, because while I'm legislating and passing policy, I'm also able to do work that helps people immediately. And you'd be surprised how many people, it's always great. Like, I love when people are like, oh man, I love that you introduced this bill to tax the rich, or you worked on this, like, legalizing weed. But there's also people who are like, man, I just like that you got me a free SEPTA card, and that's why I'm voting for you. And that's what it is, right? Like that's sewer socialism at its finest, right? It's just helping people out with these like simple things that matter to their lives, that then, frankly, give me the latitude to then work on policies that can transform their lives, right? When I'm able to meet people where they're at and meet their immediate material needs, they then have the trust in me to be able to move agendas that are bolder, right, and more visionary. So constituent services is an important part of the job. On the algorithm bill, yeah, this one is an important one. I actually care pretty deeply about this because, so even before I got into politics, I actually worked as a software engineer. So I joke to people, I know just enough about tech to know how it's dangerous. And I feel that deeply about AI, truly. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we have ahead of us in terms of just the ways in which like capitalism and tech and like private equity are like combining to just like rapidly transform, right, like the relations of labor in this country, and in using AI to just do all these really nefarious things. And one of the ways that they are leveraging it is in using AI to basically create market collusion in the housing market. So what you will see is you'll have these algorithmic softwares, the most prominent being this program called RealPage, that essentially will scrape tenant data both through public databases, but also will illegally share private tenant information amongst property managers and landlords. And then we'll use algorithms to basically calculate what is the maximum amount of rent I can charge someone, right, without like fear of eviction, essentially. So how much can I squeeze out of this tenant without pushing them over the edge? And then they all have these softwares that basically work amongst themselves to determine that price for everyone. So essentially, you have an inside colluding market that completely shuts out the ability for a tenant to negotiate, right, to have input over what they're willing to pay for housing. So it's an unfair like practice. It's become very prevalent, and we had a bill by Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke where he was able to ban the usage of some elements of algorithmic software in Philadelphia, but we have a bill that is going to ban it across the state. So I'm really excited about it. As you can imagine, they don't like it. It makes them less money, and they generally don't like that. And but we're trying to get it done. We're trying to figure out what we can do to work on this. And again, this is like an educational like challenge basically, because we have to, I think, prove to members why this is important, because their constituents are being priced out.
Yeah, I mean that's one where your sort of DSA socialism line could just line up directly with the straight up orthodox economics to be like, hey, listen, we got to preserve the market. These people are destroying the market. The market's supposed to send important price signals, and the price is being destroyed by a conspiracy, a literal conspiracy. And
it's by a conspiracy of people.
Our perfect market. Yeah, look what they've done to my boy.
Being subverted. No, it's true. No, I have said it's like this is actually subverting the market. This is not market pricing. Yeah. This is like insider trading essentially.
Yeah. But I think that's
any last thoughts that you want to?
You mentioned 2026. Yeah. So I think for 2026 it is. I mentioned that coalition payback in showing that actually we don't have to fall into like an austerity mindset. We don't have to cut things. We can actually fund things, actually fund them at higher levels than we did before the big beautiful bill. And so that's going to be a big part of this year is getting buy-in on that agenda. But also I think again just continuing to show that socialist policies and progressive policies are winning policies, and that they're policies that actually matter if you're willing to be courageous and if you're willing to have organizing conversations with people. So I'm excited because we've shown over the last 5 years that we can win, and I'm excited to see what we can do this year.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
And do you have a primary coming up?
All right, this will be a fun like gag to end it on. I do technically have someone who got onto the ballot. He is a perennial candidate. He's like one of those guys that like runs for things. I'm afraid to tell you this, so you might earn your vote, but his main campaign platform is to abolish the PPA, which, like, frankly, in some circles of West Philly is actually pretty popular. I'm not gonna lie, but he's like a completely zany dude. He challenged. The last time I ran and he ran against me, he tried to file like a legal challenge where he like quoted a play in his like legal petition. So he's really a character. But I feel pretty confident is what I'll say.
Keep you on your toes a little bit.
Yeah, he definitely he's keeping it interesting. I'll say that he's keeping it interesting. He's keeping it very interesting. So I do at the moment have a primary election, but I feel confident about the work.
Well, good luck with that, and thanks for coming on, and thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you in the next episode.